Hello everyone, welcome back. In this video, let's discuss all the concepts in React framework. So basically, React is a JavaScript library, and to make this React framework as a framework, we need to use some additional libraries like a router or a Redux for state management and all these things. So as a individual React, it majorly supports the how to render the UI quicker and faster. So that is the major feature of React, and it was developed by Facebook, and it will allow unidirectional data flow, like sharing the data from the parent to child, but it will still allow the two-way data binding also, two-way sharing also, like child to parent also, by using Redux and other features we'll discuss in detail. So it has another feature called directives, where we like a use client and use server. So if you want to define a specific component as a client side component, you need to set this use client on top of the class. At the same time, if you want to mark a specific component as a server side component, you can set this use server string on the top of the component, so that the framework is going to consider that particular component as a server side component. And also React supports JSX, which is of a JavaScript extension or XML that you can consider, which will allow the user to include the TypeScript code within the HTML. So this is one additional feature of React. And the last one is the virtual DOM. So this is one of the core feature of React. Because of this core feature only, React became famous, and it is much better when it comes to the performance compared with any other framework. So this is the major feature. Let's discuss about each and every concept in detail. Now let's understand how React manipulates the DOM, which is of document object model. That means when the React application is rendered onto the browser, so how it will render onto the browser, on what basis. Okay, so basically a DOM always renders HTML in the tree structure. If you see this left side example, HTML code, where we have HTML tag, head component, within that there is a title, and there is a body, within that h1 and p tags. Okay, when this is rendered onto the browser, so it will create the tree structure. Like the right side, if you see, HTML is a parent, and there are three childs, which is of a head, title and body. These three are the same level, and within the body there are h1 as well as p tag, so they will come under body. So this is how the DOM renders onto the browser, and this is how the DOM works. And let's look at how React manipulate this DOM and render the React application much faster in the browser. So basically, React follows a feature called virtual DOM. Okay, so any other framework other than React and Next.js, all the other frameworks, they are going to directly render its HTML onto the real browser. For suppose if you consider a Chrome browser, it will directly render onto that particular browser. But any browser, the Chrome or Firefox or Mozilla or any other browsers, they are not just built just for a specific React based application. You know, it is generated, it is developed to render any framework application, whether it is Python or any sort of Angular or any other framework. So this is not sufficient enough for React to render and improve the performance. So for that reason, React came up with the feature called virtual DOM. So it will create a virtual DOM on top of the regular browser DOM. Okay, then React is going to create one more virtual DOM on top of it, the fake DOM. Okay, and it will render the React application onto that fake DOM, which is created just for React application. So for that reason, it will render the UI much faster when it comes to any other framework as of today. Okay, so it will update to the virtual DOM, and internally React uses algorithm called diffing algorithm. So this diffing algorithm is going to compare when there is a change on the virtual DOM. Okay, US, Canada, India, UK, that is rendered onto the virtual browser or virtual DOM. Okay, so if we add one more thing called Pakistan in this particular page, okay, under UK, okay, it will be directly updated to the virtual DOM and it is visible to the user. Internally, it will use the diffing algorithm and it will check the real browser DOM and compare the content from the virtual DOM. It will find out the difference which is of a Pakistan field. Okay, when it finds that difference using diffing algorithm, it will update this Pakistan to the actual real browser behind the scenes, so that you cannot see as a user. Okay, because of this reason, React executes and renders the UI components much faster compared with any other framework as of 2024. Okay, Next.js is one more framework that is there, but it is also using the React UI DOM manipulation as only. So the Next.js is one more framework which is developed on top of the React.js. So for that reason, it will perform the same way, but React is something that came up with this virtual DOM feature. So this is how the DOM manipulation works in React, and also this is one of the important interview question in React.js interview. Every React.js interview, definitely you'll get to this particular question asking about what is virtual DOM in React.js. So just focus on this virtual DOM and its implementation approach. The next one is components. So the component is a building block of React application. So any newer framework, modern framework that is developed in recent time, like Angular or React or Next.js, any sort of framework, Vue.js also, all are developed based on the components. And component is a piece of a page, and web page can have one or more components. So for suppose if you see this particular example, in this web page, we have a login component and a register component. These two are independent but rendered onto the same page. Okay, and so to create this type of page, all we need to do is we need to have a parent component that extends React component, and within the render, all we need to do is add this login component and register component. Okay, so that it will be rendered onto this particular parent component. Okay, so basically, and we need to import them using import. Okay, so there are total 3 components. So the main component is the parent component, and login and register component are passed as a childs to this particular parent component, and because of that reason, it is rendered onto the page. Okay, so components can have child components also, like in this example, within the parent component, login and register are the child components. Okay, and the components can be independent, and if you see login component and register component, there is no relation. So there is no relation like parent child relation between login and register component, but parent both have the same parent, which is a parent component, but login and register, they are completely independent. So we can have independent components as well. Okay, and also these components can share the data between them. Even if there is a relation between the components, even without having relationship, they can still share the data. So now let's look at how we can share the data between the components in React.js. Okay, if you see the left side web page where we have personal details and experience details. Okay, within the personal details, we have a name and the location, which is of address. On the right side, you see the role as well as the company and a number of years of experience. Okay, in this scenario, so left side component is personal details, right side component is experience details. Okay, both these components are part of the parent component. Okay, which is of a main component, app component. Okay, to share the data from the parent component to the personal component as well as the experience component, all we need to do is we need to use use state with the details. Okay, and the set details method, and use effect, of course, to make the API call to get the data. Once we get the data, we are setting it to the set details method. Okay, so because of that, details will have all the details. Okay, once we have those details, if you see the personal details messages, personal details, the details, okay, under personal details, and the property name is details. Within this we are getting the details dot personal details. That means from the details we are getting the personal details out of it, and we are passing it to the personal details component as a child. This is the child component, okay, for the parent component. And the next one also, experience details, also we are passing a parameter called details, and we are passing the experience details for this. So this is how you can share the data from the parent component to the child component. Okay, there should be a property and a value. Okay, so this is how you can share the data between the parent to child. Okay, so the next thing is, since in the previous slide we shared the data from the parent to the child, right? So within the child, to get hold of the data that is passed from the parent, okay, the component should have a property called props. Like we are looking at the personal details, okay, so there is something called props. These props will get hold of the details that are passed in the previous slide. Okay, within the props we can call props dot personal details dot name and the address, so that we can get hold of the name and the address. And the same follows to the experience details component also. Whatever is passed from the parent, it is coming as part of the props, and from the props we can get hold of the object and the fields. This is how you can get hold of the data that is passed from the parent to the child using props. So the next way to share the data between the React components is using context. Okay, the context is going to share the data for any component as long as it is wrapped on top of the main app component, so that it will be available to any component within the project. Okay, so to wrap this context, all we need to do is, if you see the return my context dot provider, and we are passing the value equal to details, and we have a personal details component. Okay, by default, since the context is passed, so available to the personal details component, like using props we need to pass the parameter, okay, for the child component, but with the context you no need to set the property name and pass the props to the child component. Instead, by default you can get hold in the right side, if you see the personal details component, all we need to do is we need to get hold of the context using use context and get hold of the my context. And once you get hold of the context, directly you can use the details, and you can print those details like a name and the address. Okay, in this process, the difference between using props and context is, with the props you need to pass that parameter to the child component, and it will be passed to the child in the format of props. When it comes to the context, you no need to pass anything as long as it is wrapped under the main context. Okay, so it will be by default available, but to get hold of those we need to use the get hold of the use context and get the values that you want to use within the component. So this is one more way of sharing the data in React.js. So the third and most important way to share the data in React.js is using Redux. Okay, this is the feature to maintain the state management also in React.js. So basically, like I said, React is a library, it is not a complete framework. So to maintain the state, we have to use one more library called Redux. So with this Redux, we can push the data from any component to the Redux, and we can get the data from the Redux in any component. Okay, so this will act like a database, but which will be holded on the UI side. Okay, so as long as you want to maintain the data within the UI itself, and you can simply push the data to the Redux, and at the same time you can get the data from the Redux. Okay, so there are some more additional inbuilt components in React.js, which is of Fragment, the first one. So the Fragment is a group it will group the elements without having a parent node. That means if on the main any of the component page, any of the component, if you want to have or display multiple components like first child and second child, okay, so to group these two together, we need to use these fragments and keep this content within that fragment so that it will group all the child components within the parent. Okay, this is one of the inbuilt component that we can directly use it. We no need to create it. So the next one is profiler. So the profiler, it will measure the rendering performance of a React component. So if when the component is rendered onto the browser, it will calculate the performance of this particular component and it will display the results. Okay, for that reason we need to keep this complete app component within the profiler, and we can pass a ID as well as on render function. Within the on render we will get those stats and we can perform whatever the action that we want to do using those stats. So this is how you can use the profiler. This is also one more inbuilt component. And the third one is strict mode component. Okay, so if you wrap the app component with the strict mode, it will find the bugs while developing the application. So instead of since if you are using a TypeScript or JavaScript or something, so when you are writing the code, you might add some bugs while developing, right? If you use this, if you wrap this app component within the strict mode, so that it will automatically detect the problems in while writing the code itself, and it will alert the developer to correct it. So then the last one is suspense. So it will let you display a fallback until its children have finished loading. That means if there is a scenario where you want to make the backend API call and fetch the data and get it and show it on the page, okay, this might take a few seconds. Okay, so for those few seconds, instead of just keeping the user idle and show nothing on the page, instead of that we can have a fallback saying loading the content, loading the records or loading the results. Okay, we can show that loading spinner. Once the results are ready, it will hide the spinner and it will show the actual component data. Okay, in this example, if you see some component, right, that some component, if it is by the time it is rendering, it will show the loading indicator on the page. Once that is done, that's when it will show the actual content, when the content is ready to render on the browser. So the next one is React hooks. So there are different type of React hooks that are available. So when the component is rendered onto the browser, so every React component is going to go through certain specific lifecycle hooks, and we can use those hooks and perform some logic within it, and we can pass that content or whatever the logic outcome of the logic to the page to display. Okay, there are different type of hooks. The first one is state hooks. So state hooks are use state and a use reducer. A state meaning holding some data within it. Okay, so if you use state, which will hold a specific single value or multiple values or array of values. Okay, in this example, if you want to hold a single value, which is name, you can say constant the parameter name, which is of name, and the setter method to set the name. So the set name and use state, the initial value is null. So if you directly use this name in the HTML, you can get hold of the name, but to change this name, you need to use set name method and set the value so that it will be updated. Okay, that means it is holding a single value within a component. Okay, state is specific to a component. Okay, the next one is use reducer. So use reducer takes care of the React state management. Okay, React application state management. Okay, so within if you want to use a use reducer, we have to, whatever the data that you want to save, okay, to or the state, that can be passed to a dispatch function like a type and the name Shiva. So when you dispatch it, it will be stored in the Redux, and whenever we want to get that data, we can get that data from the Redux. Okay, so these are the two state management hooks in React. So the next one is context hooks. Okay, so the use context. So basically this context can be used across the application, and as long as if you wrap this context on top of the app component, so whatever is passed as part of the context, it is available to any component. So for suppose in this example, we are passing a theme context. Nowadays in every application or even the phone also, there will be a dark mode and light mode, right? So to update dark mode to light mode to dark mode, we need to use this theme. Okay, this theme, it will have dark or a light theme, and you need to set that to your HTML within the component so that it will get updated automatically based on the user preference on the light or dark theme. So for that type of a scenario, anything that is passed across the application, okay, that can be kept in the context, and the context will be available to any component. The next one is the reference hook, which is of use ref. Okay, it will basically hold a value, but this value cannot be or shouldn't be used in the HTML. Okay, it is basically hold the value. So once it is holding the value, that can be we can perform some action on the HTML, but this use ref name itself cannot be directly used in the page. Okay, for suppose in this example, basically this can be used majorly with the CSS. Okay, in this example, we initialize it as a constant input ref and a use ref, right? This reference, within this ref, we can get hold of a specific HTML div or HTML component, and we can perform the CSS actions on top of that particular component that is part of the HTML. But okay, for that we can either change the background color, height or width or any CSS that can be done. But for that we need to use this use ref and get hold of this reference of that specific HTML component and perform these activities. So the next one is effect hooks. Okay, so the effect hooks there are three effect hooks: use effect, use layout effect, use insertion effect. So use effect is a hook that we use on daily basis in real-time production application. So within this use effect, we can either make any external calls and get the data like a REST API call or anything which will affect the page. Okay, whatever the data that is coming from the use effect from the API, that can be used in the HTML. That means it is affecting the HTML page. So that's why it is a use effect. So it will affect the page. Okay, and other than this, there is a use layout effect and use insertion effect. So these two are very rare that we use, but these two can be used even to update the CSS or manipulate the CSS. Okay, so the next one is performance hooks. Okay, which will improve the performance of the application if you use them. So for suppose the first one is use memo. So use memo can be used to filter out specific data, or this we can perform some logic which will improve the performance. In this example, if you see filter to-dos, and we are filtering the list of to-dos and returning the filtered to-dos. Okay, that means for suppose if you have 100 records of to-do records in the use effect, you got this 100 records, but you want to show only 50 records of it, but you want to still keep that 50 but do not want to display it on the page. Okay, that is not needed. Or for suppose if there is a scenario where you have a pagination and you want to display only 10 records at a time, when the user click that pagination, that's when you want to show the leftover records. So which will improve the performance instead of loading all the 100 records at a time. So in that type of scenario, you can use the use memo and you can apply the pagination to that particular page, which will improve the performance. Okay, the next one is use transition. So use transition is almost kind of using a loader or showing a fallback. Okay, if there is a page transition of displaying some content and the content is not available to display, you can use the use transition and set the loading or loading indicator or something, so that by the time the page gets the actual content or actual data to display, that's when the use transition will be faded out and the actual component is going to be displayed. And use deferred value, this is also one of the unused or least used React hook, and don't need to worry about it. And if you want to read or understand more about these React hooks, I created one more separate video particularly for React hooks. I'll share that in the description. You can refer that video. The next thing is routing. Basically, React is a library, so it doesn't have a direct routing feature, but to use a routing in React, we have to use a module called React-router-DOM. Okay, this is a third-party library that we can use within the React application. So we need to import this library into package.json file, okay, by running npm install --save and the library name React-router-DOM, so that it will save that library to our package.json file. And after that, so there is a specific structure, folder structure that React follows to route. So if you see the left side under the src, there is a folder called pages. So every page in React should go inside the pages folder, otherwise it won't route. Okay, so under the src and the pages, and there are two files which is of a blocks.js and contact.js. So there are two files, okay, under pages. So to route to these two blocks and the contact, all we need to do is we need to go to the app component. Within the app component, we need to set the browser router. Okay, within that we need to set the routes, and each route with a path which will be of a file name without .js extension. You can even set, if there is no path matching, you can set the no page route. Okay, that's how the routing works in React.js. Now let's look at how we can make the backend REST API calls with React.js, okay, within the React.js application. So there are two libraries that are available that can be used in React.js to make the REST API calls. First one is fetch, and the second one is axios. So both are serving the same purpose to make the REST API call. The only minor difference is fetch. If you make the fetch API call, once you get the response, you need to call the .json method to get the actual JSON content out of the response. When it comes to the axios, it will directly give the JSON response, so that you no need to call the .json method on top of the response. Okay, so in this particular example, if you see, this fetch or axios can be used to get the data from the backend to the page, or at the same time when you click some button or something, it will be used again to send the data to the back to the database. Okay, in both ways it will work. You can use either fetch or axios. Now let's look at the example. Okay, on the page load, okay, on the page load, if you want to make the API call, you need to keep this API call within the use effect lifecycle hook, so that you can make the REST API call. By the time the page is rendered, we can get the data and pass it onto the page. Okay, in this scenario, if you want to get the data on the page load, you need to call the API in the use effect. And if you see fetch call, we are getting the data, we are calling the .json method because it is of a fetch. If you are using axios, you no need to call .json method. Okay, and if you want to send the data from the UI to the backend, okay, there should be some trigger, event should be triggered. So in this example, if you see, there is a button on click get data, and we have a get data button. Okay, when you click it, on click, it will go to get data function. Okay, async function get data. Within that we can make the fetch call. Okay, so two different ways. So any web application that you want to learn or web framework, two things that you should know: how to pass the data to the backend from the UI, and how to get the data from the backend and to the UI and display. These are the two important things that every UI developer should know when you are looking at a specific framework. Okay, so now let's understand the state management in detail. Okay, so basically, if you see the left side, if you see this particular example where we have a computer with the application and there is a API and the backend database. Okay, every time there will be scenarios where you need to hold some data on the UI side instead of every time going to the REST API or the backend. Okay, in that type of scenario, in React.js application, instead of directly going to the database, or we can get hold of the data on the UI using Redux. Okay, so application is going to interact with the Redux, and internally, if we want, we can push this data from the Redux to the backend when needed. Okay, we no need to directly connect to the DB via REST API. Instead, we can hold the data on the page using Redux, and it is the main feature for state management in React.js. And if you want to know more about React.js Redux, I made one more video before, and I'll share that in the description. You can refer that. That's all from this session. Thank you. See you in the next video.